little model. This is our scan, and if I zoom in a little bit, you can see how easy it is to navigate this little fella and look from all different angles. Okay. So what I wanted to do is just to show you some of the benefits to sculpting digitally and how it can help when it comes to, or at least working alongside, real life clay sculpting. There's an integrity you get from clay sculpting that's really hard to replicate with digital sculpting, but digital sculpting can help refine certain areas and add detail to and fine finishes to parts that really are just almost impossible with real sculpting. So let me just run through some of these benefits. So you can see with this navigation here, I'm using an art pad, so I have like an electronic sort of pencil with a pad, and with this I can zoom in, and with this scanned mesh that's been cleaned up, if I turn the mesh on, you can see this mesh, and as I zoom in, you can see that we can zoom in pretty much to infinity. Okay, so what it means is that you can refine the mesh to a degree. If I just turn this mesh off for a moment, you can refine the sculpture and the mesh in ways that you couldn't in reality. So you can see the red cursor I have here, that it changes its orientation depending on the surface that it's on. So you can see as I move it over, it's moving around over that surface. I can adjust the size of this cursor, again, almost to nothing. But if you think in real terms, the size of a finger might be something like about this size in reality. So, and a sculpting tool in reality, you might get it down to this big, but obviously it's on the end of a long stick. So it's very, very difficult to come in here and work areas in the same way that we can in a moment. I'm going to show you in a moment. So zooming in and out is one of the great benefits to sculpting digitally. You can really get in and look at these details. Now when I'm sculpting, I've got lots of options. If I press B on the keyboard, I've got a plethora of brushes to choose from, and ultimately you generally only use 5 or 6, but there are specialist brushes for all sorts of different things. But if I choose something like clay build up here, and I'll just increase the size just to give you a really big idea of what this brush can do. Basically you can sculpt, and you can add, and you can take away. Can you see? So what this means is that you can build up, you can build up, you can build up, and that's all fantastic. And it's as close to the real thing as I think you can get. It really is an amazing thing to be able to do. You can really start to add form to your sculpture, and it really feels like you're in the real world. It's very odd when you're sculpting. So that's just a very quick headline on what the one of the brushes can do. And the other thing that you can do with sculpting digitally is you can actually undo your sculpts. So if you don't like what you've done, and I'm going to do it here, I press Z on the keyboard, and every time I press it, the brush stroke is undone. So I can undo it. I can press, or I can actually choose the cursor, this little orange thing back here, and drag it back. Okay, so it means that if you like some of the things you've done, you can stop and then you can carry on sculpting. So with the sculpting tool, you can zoom in, you can reduce the brush size, and then you can start to refine your sculpture. Okay. Now, one of the things that you can also do, or one of the brushes that works alongside the clay build-up that I've just used, is called the smooth brush. So I just hold the shift key down and it smooths what I'm sculpting. And hopefully you can see that. It's really simple, but it's massively effective. This is one of the hardest things to do when you're sculpting clay, is to get areas smooth and for them to stay smooth, because inevitably they get knocked or you want to move the clay around a little bit. With digital, it's as easy as this. Smooth is easy. Let's put it that way. And if you don't like it, you undo it. There we go. So you've got the clay build-up brush, you've got the smooth brush, and then you've got another brush which is really good. And this is, I'm just showing you just a couple of brushes because it really makes a big difference when you can visualize how this can help. And this brush is called the Dam Standard, and basically it's a way of scratching in lines. But you can see that when you're going in that fine with that level of detail and control, you can really make a huge impact on the level of detail and the quality of the detail that you're putting in, and then you can smooth it out. You can undo it if you don't like it, and on. So those three brushes give you the ability to really make some big differences to what you're doing, and yeah, so that's a good thing to be able to do. Let me see. Your next thing, separating objects. So bringing a scan in. Now, often when you're sculpting, I think it's a really good idea to be able to separate objects and have objects worked on separately. But now when you're sculpting a great big clay object like this, for real, it's very difficult and it doesn't always work out the way you want it to. One thing can affect another, and you want to work on the tie, but you keep knocking the shirt or the collar. So one of the things that you can do, if I just make the cursor a little bit bigger, I can mask off, if I click the right button, mask pen. I'm just going to reduce the focal shift, make a harder edge. You can mask off objects. I'm going to do this very quickly. It's not going to be too pretty, but it will show you the principle. So by masking this object off, I can then make it into a separate group and then make a separate object. And when I say a separate group, I mean a poly group. So the mesh becomes a separate mesh. So there, I've just done a very, very quick job. Now if I go group masked, I can then look at the mesh and you can see it's a different color. So if I tap it, it now becomes a separate object. I don't want this bit at the back, so I'm going to select and put that back with the other group. And if I do this, it inverses it. Okay, so I'm going to make that a blue colour, and this one's purple. Now, if I just turn these off for a second, there we are, we're back. You can see on the side here we have groups. So we've got the cleaned scan, which is the scan I'm working on, and then we have the tie. Let me just double check. Now I just wanted to double check this. Okay. So what I want to do now is to group I know what I'm doing. Now I know what I'm doing. I lost myself for a moment there. If I shoot this guy up to the top, there he is. There's the tie. So what I'm going to do is to groups split. And that's okay. So now you can see he's on a separate group and the tie has disappeared. So now we have a great big hole where the tie was. So now if I remesh that and close the holes, you'll see in a second the holes are covered up. And if I grab my brush, I can start to smooth it out. And I'm going to do this very quickly and it won't be too pretty. I have the wrong brush. I want the clay build-up brush. And then the smooth brush. So just really, really quickly, you can see I'll just remesh that. And that tidies it up a bit more. And you would spend as much time as you want. And zoom in if you like to get rid of these creases and details. Smooth it out. Okay, right, that's very, very quickly done, but what it means is then you can get your brush, and let's just turn it on. So now that's a separate object on a separate layer, so you can work on him separately, and obviously you would tidy all of these edges up and smooth them all out. In fact, you would close the back first. What we want is watertight objects, so that you don't have open backs when you want things to be 3D printed or made into bronzes or something. You always want to make sure you're watertight. It's just a kind of practice that I follow. So, but yeah, so you can see now that the tie becomes a separate object that I can move around and work with. So, but I'm not changing any of the collar. I'm not knocking it. I'm not moving it. It's not being resized or worked in a different way. So now I can work and move the tie around, but without affecting anything else. That's a massive plus in comparison to working on a sculpt for real, where you're trying to work an edge, but you can't quite get it, and then you knock the collar or whatever. It's not good. So that's a really big plus.